Every October, as Halloween approaches, state archaeologist Nick Bellantoni is flooded with requests to speak about Connecticut's vampires. His story starts in 1990 in Griswold.
Some kids came to play on the weekend at the gravel bank, and they were sliding down, having a good old time. One slide down, 2 skulls dislodged and rolled down the hill with them. They had inadvertently encountered an 18th century farming family cemetery where the farmers just buried on the back lot.
In 28 of the graves, the remains lay anatomically, but one skeleton had been rearranged. The skull had been separated from the body and turned around. The ribs were broken, and the femurs had been removed and placed across the chest. Examination of the bones revealed lesions associated with tuberculosis.
He dies, he's buried in a good Christian fashion. About 5 years later, somebody goes into his grave and digs him up and rearranges him. And the question was why. At that point, while we were still kind of scratching our heads, one of the archaeologists out at the scene said, "Well, have you heard about the Jewett City vampire and the Ray family?"
Just a few miles away, in the Jewett City Cemetery, are the graves of Henry Ray and his sons Lemuel and Elisha, all of whom died of tuberculosis in the mid-19th century. An 1854 newspaper article describes what happened when a third son, 34-year-old Henry N. Ray, became ill.
This family had been worried about this young man that had the tuberculosis and was dying, and 3 family members had already died with it. The family and friends came to the cemetery, dug up the 2 boys, which were Lemuel and Elisha, and burned their bodies on the spot.
So, did the Ray family really have vampires in their midst?
It's extremely unlikely that they would have known the word vampire.
This is not Bela Lugosi in the middle of the night with bats flying through the air.
If they called it anything at all, they might have called it a spirit, a demon, or a ghost.
Fay Ringel is the author of New England's Gothic Literature, History and Folklore of the Supernatural.
More likely, they didn't call it anything at all, along the lines of speak of the devil and he'll appear.
If the specter of a superstition wasn't enough to scare residents of 19th century New England, there were the very real effects of a debilitating illness.
Tuberculosis, or consumption, was the biggest killer of adult Americans prior to the Civil War.
Their conception was that this horrible disease of consumption, what we call tuberculosis or TB, that consumption was something quite literal, literally consuming the victim. And it's not a long step from there's something heavy pressing on my chest, I feel as though I'm being eaten alive, to thinking that something is eating you alive.
You know, the hypothesis of the dead spreading diseases, it made some sense to them.
Someone digging up a relative they suspected of being undead might never have seen a decomposing corpse before, and they would have been surprised by what they saw.
So you get these stories of people that they're actually seeing physical changes, and you've got these bloated corpses, and then you have these living people suffering from the disease that are referred to as wasting away. They're getting thinner, they're paler, they have no energy, they're sick, they're wasting. And so the correlation that one is feeding on the other and taking the life out of them, you know, it made sense in their world. It's a false hypothesis. We know that, but they were willing to try anything to keep the living with them.
Absent today's modern medical knowledge, people look to folklore for a cure.
Just like there seems to be a universal belief in bloodsuckers or life force suckers all around the world, hungry ghosts, so there are also universal remedies which in some way are about killing the dead. Well, how do you kill the dead? Well, you mutilate their bodies, or you do something to their organs, or you burn the body.
On October 30th, Bellantoni will lead a walk through the Jewett City Cemetery. While the subject of vampirism may draw the crowds, Bellantoni uses it as an opportunity to discuss the science of archaeology.
We were able to go from the hard, tangible, physical evidence of a disturbed burial to ideas that people shared about death and disease. And to tell that story is really a part of an archaeological research endeavor. So I use it to teach about archaeology too, and how why this is such an important science.
So why then, over 150 years after the deaths of Lemuel, Henry, and Elisha Ray, does interest in their stories persist?
You know, vampires never die. It's just a concept that people, I don't know, from Bram Stoker on, it's just never ceased, and it will. You try to be scientific, but I'll end up being known for a vampirism when I'm gone.